Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us tmosso at the1916company.com for purchase pricing and availability questions concerning this watch. Launched in 2018, this is the Patek Philippe Nautilus Perpetual Calendar. It is the reference 5741G-001, and it was the first ever Nautilus Perpetual Calendar. The watch is sized like the traditional jumbo, which is to say it's not like the annual calendars or the chronographs. 40 millimeters in diameter. I measure it 8.7 millimeters thick from lug tip to lug tip. We're just talking the case. It is 44.3 millimeters. If we measure the first end link on each side to get a more complete picture of how broad it is across the wrist, then the distance across the wrist is 48.3 millimeters. I'm going to put it on my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference. It's got a nice weight to it. It feels very substantial, but it's also thin. You can see it'll easily slide underneath a dress sleeve. The watch wears like a 5711, 5811, or a 5712, which is to say it wears like a traditional jumbo. It's thin, it's short across the wrist, and I could recommend it for a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference. It's a really good fit on my wrist, and you would have no trouble going a little bit smaller, maybe even wearing it on a lady's wrist. I've seen it done. So the watch is made of white gold, but it's really gray gold, a type of gold that Patek has been using since at least 2006. It's the best type of white gold. It's white all the way through, so if you scratch it, it's the same color underneath, and it never needs to be rhodium plated. The Nautilus case has always been a little bit more sophisticated than the Aquanaut. You can see this is a three-piece case here. And so all of those pieces are individually finished with little details like this graceful lug bevel or the break between polish and satin that occurs on one continuous piece of metal in the wing that flanks each bezel. The complexity of the finishing and fabrication of the Nautilus case, as much as positioning and seniority in the model line, this complexity really explains why a Nautilus costs more than an equivalent Aquanaut. And that continues on the bracelet, where the Aquanaut bracelet has always been a little bit simplified for pricing reasons, maybe even a little bit crude for the price point. The Nautilus bracelet feels immensely refined. It is incredibly silky, flexible, comfortable, and yet there's not a ton of lateral play. What you can also see is that when you apply pressure to one side and pull the bracelet towards you and then you run your finger down the edge, you can barely feel the step down from link to link. It's almost like a completely smooth sweep, such are the tolerances. And in profile, you can see we have satin faces. We have that bevel that continues from the lug hood all the way down toward the clasp. Satin finished primaries with polished intermediates. We have removable links here fixed by pin and sleeve, and that is because Patek doesn't want people to strip out flathead screws and strand links in the bracelet, which then have to be drilled and tapped out. So the idea here is to create something that's just as secure but can't accidentally result in stranded links. Now, we did have an upgrade of the clasp. This is considerably more sophisticated than what you would have found on a 5711 back in 2018. And the twin trigger design of the double fold is really the design the entire Nautilus model line took subsequently. Though, I just want to be clear, the later quick adjusters that allow you to slot in and out at each link, this particular bracelet does not have that quick adjustment system, but it does have the double trigger, double folding clasp. You can see a little part of the Calatrava cross motif, which is the logo of the company. That's it in its entirety. Rolling around to the case, we have a screw down crown. The watch is now rated at 30 meters, like all Patek Philippe watches as of 2024. When this came out in 2018, it was described as a 60-meter watch with a screw down crown. So some 30-meter watches, I guess, these days are more equal than others, and this is, with the crown screwed down, definitely a surface swimming style watch. As with every Nautilus, I've often found that the watch maybe is a bit more holistically coherent design than the former Royal Oak. Of course, Gerald Genta designed the original Nautilus 3700 Jumbo in 1976, 4 years after his landmark Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, and while they're often compared to each other, take a look at the bezel here. The Royal Oak has a rounded octagonal bezel, but the inner bezel, crystal, and dial are all round, whereas outer bezel, inner bezel, crystal, and dial, they all have that rounded off faceted form, which I feel is a second pass at the idea and a better execution of it. Also, though it's a 40, because the wings measure about 42 millimeters across, visually it reads as a bigger watch. You can see the dial has a much brighter, more colorful, I guess the word would be saturated, blue than you'll find on a 5711, and there's no real gradient to it. It seems the same blue all the way across, so there's no fade. White gold hands and indices, the idea being white gold will never tarnish, oxidize, or fade over time, so you have a wonderful longevity to these dial components. There is luminescence of the time, not necessarily the calendar, but the calendar is there, perpetual calendar. So we have a couple of mono counters coaxially. At 3 o'clock, we have the leap year phase and we have the month. At 6 o'clock, we have a pointer date with a moon phase. And while the perpetual calendar can keep time, or I should say, the date, month, and moon and leap until 2100, the moon leaps ahead in the year 2100 because between settings, the moon phase only needs one correction every 122 years, whereas in the year 2100, this will have to go back to the factory to have the calendar system reset. That's a long way off. It'll deal with leap years and irregular length months, no problem. At 9 o'clock, we have a mono counter that has the day and then also has a 24-hour display. So what that does is it tells you when you shouldn't use these little pusher adjusters to correct the calendar. When the stub hand is in the nighttime positions, roughly speaking, I would say be careful anytime between 8 o'clock and 4 a.m. What you want to do is make sure you set the calendar at a time when these little pusher adjusters will not damage it. You can always roll the watch through the calendar turnover safely, and that is the best way to do it if you need to advance it and then set the time manually. Advance through the calendar turnover, set the watch to 6:30 a.m., and then use these little pusher adjusters. And you can see that little stub hand is just past 6, so you know I'm looking at 6:30 a.m. and not p.m. So that's important to keep in mind. And I'm going to screw that in right there. Disconnect those two things. So this watch is going to be a timepiece that you want to set at 6:30 a.m. And that's when you set all of the indications, the moon phase, the date, the month, and the leap year. If you need to set the leap year, remember, the leap year is the summer Olympic year. Rolling around to the case back. Whereas the standard 57 or 5811 has a center rotor automatic. The more premium Micro-Rotor is used here. So this is the caliber 240Q, so perpetual calendar and moon phase, a 22-karat Micro-Rotor automatic winding system on hybrid ceramic bearings for a 48-hour power reserve, 3 Hz beat rate, 6-position adjustment, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, and a free-sprung gyromax style balance. With the Patek Philippe Seal, this watch is accurate to no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per day, but Patek is calling the exact same watch accurate to no worse than -1 + 2 seconds per day as of 2024. So my guess is if this watch goes into service at Patek, it will come back to you regulated to the more recent standard. As there has been no mechanical change to the watch, there is no reason this watch could not meet that standard. What I like about the Micro-Rotor is that in spite of the addition of a perpetual calendar module, this is really no thicker than a Nautilus Jumbo. And you've got this big open, beautiful display caseback vista, so you don't have a winding bridge and a center rotor blocking your view of the movement. You can see the engine turning on the base plate, circular perlage in several different sizes on different surfaces. You could see satination on all the wheels. You could see that there's Côte de Genève across the bridges, perfectly aligned from bridge to bridge. We have black polished screw heads with chamfered slots in circumference, and you can see that the bevels are nicely mirrored and rounded, likely started mechanically but finished with a handheld buffer on a drill bit, a special tool that's used to create a mirror shine on bevels that are started mechanically but finished by a more handcrafted method. You can also see beveling inside all the jewel sinks, a partridge eye look, and that locating pegs like these 3 right here that are used to locate a bridge on the plate beneath, those pegs have been polished on their tops. If you love this watch, reach out to Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.